which is why I circle back around to say that just about anything could be an improvement on what we have, but certainly the universal basic income, which restores a certain degree of decency, adequacy, and it doesn't force you to work, right? I would say, you know, it really is just so superior to what we have that it's not even up for discussion anymore, I guess is what I want to say. So if you're you know, at a cocktail party and people are talking about it, you're like, well, we have to figure out whether or not, you know, a UBI is better than what we have. You can be the one that says, no, wait, you know, I went to this thing at the Bushwick generator and I know that what we have is terrible and, you know, we need a UBI.
So I just want to say that safety net is designed to catch people who fall through the cracks in the economy. So people who fail to thrive. And if you have a foundation of a basic income, there are no cracks. There's nothing to fall through, and you don't need a safety net. And basic income itself is not a safety net. It's fundamental economic infrastructure that just makes things work. So that's it.
All right, which leads me to my next question. So much of the discourse examines basic income from a social welfare perspective, but UBI can also be understood through the lens of monetary reform as a policy tool for central banks. For example, we can call it helicopter money, as framed by Milton Friedman, or we can interpret it as quantitative easing for the people. Do you think that there's any reason to focus more on the social aspect of basic income versus its macroeconomic role? This is anyone who wants to take that.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said in my talk, the purpose of the economy exists for the benefit of the people. So when we're looking at the economy and we want the economy to function well, ultimately what we care about is people's well-being. So all of this stuff, anytime we're talking about any of this stuff, any policy, any monetary policy, any public policy, anything like that, it's all ultimately about social welfare, and it's just kind of about the angle that we take. So I think, you know, it is useful to think about basic income as something that makes the economy more efficient, and ultimately that is about social welfare too. And as far as helicopter money goes, I think Milton Friedman was mostly that was not a positive comment that he made when he was suggesting helicopter money. But I think it's right. And this is kind of the point I was talking about earlier, that, you know, what matters is whether there's somewhere for the money to go in the economy. And that means that whenever the government spends money into the economy, they're essentially creating new money in a part of the economy that didn't have money before. And anytime they're taxing, they're essentially removing money from part of the economy. But it's not the case that you can just take a dollar from one part of the economy and put it somewhere else in the economy. It doesn't work that way. There has to be room for the additional spending. And taking a lot of money away from Bill Gates doesn't somehow mean that there's more room for everyone else in the economy to buy hamburgers. We have to have the capacity to produce the hamburgers in the first place. So yeah, it is all about social welfare though.
Yeah, I actually think I agree. I don't think the distinction is real. Like there's macroeconomic concerns and then social welfare concerns. The economy and the macroeconomy should be for people. And I mean, we have to think about incentives and things like that. But the point of an economy is to produce stuff in certain ways and allocate to people who need things. So I don't recognize the distinction really between the macro and social welfare. They're all the same to me.
I agree with that. Great. So as we've seen today, there are some creative, independent efforts to build UBI systems. But on the other hand, we also have some government entities looking at UBI, as seen in Finland, India, or here in the US, like in Alaska, or there's a trial starting in Stockton, California. What do you think are the biggest barriers to a governmental basic income system? And how do you see these independent UBI projects fitting in?
You go for it.
I'm going to answer that, but I want to make a comment about one of the question too. A lot the UBIs, a lot of the policies that are being looked at, that are being called UBIs, aren't UBIs. For example, at least not as I defined it earlier. So in Finland, as I understand it, they are allocating money to just that employee. And the findings that came out recently were based on giving money to an employee. The UBI is universal, but that's not really a UBI. And I think the Stockton plan is based on Chris Hughes' proposal, which is also not a UBI. It's what we used to call a participation income. He didn't call it that, but it's basically an amount of money that people get, but they must work to get it. And what he wants to do is broadly define work, or define work more broadly. So it wouldn't just be wage work, it would be education, schooling, and also care work. So it's work condition that just defines work more broadly. And I just say that because I worry that a lot of the studies out there that being called UBI may result in findings that folks will generalize to UBI and they may or may not apply to UBI. Right? So that's a comment, I guess, on part of the question. The other part was what is the, I guess, one of the barriers to a government UBI? I know the U.S. best, I guess, in this respect. I mean, I say that most. So I think in the U.S., it's probably a combination of what we sometimes call the work ethic and racism. And what I mean is that there seems to be a view that people should not get something for nothing. Folks should have to work for their income and their housing and things like that, their food and things like that. And I think tied to that is, on the part of many people, a view that Black and brown people are the ones who are most likely not to work. And, they're lazy and shiftless, and a basic income would allow those people to sort of just, cheat and I don't know, cheat and freeload and things like that. So I think it's racism and a very strident work ethic, I call it that. I think that's sort of the biggest barrier, which is why I think is it pessimistic? I don't know, moments. I think that in this country, and maybe in other parts of the world too, the only way that folks might end up supporting a basic income by way of government might be if they are convinced the robots are coming. If people really become convinced the robots are coming, and not just for the lazy Black folks job, but for my industrious white kid too, but then maybe some openness to something like this. I hope I'm wrong, but that's what I often sort of think sometimes.
I would just add to that I think that there's also wrapped up in that is the notion of power, right? So $1,000 a month is a very powerful thing, even living in a place like New York or an expensive place, with money brings options, especially for the very, very poor who have fallen through the safety net, who really don't have the means to survive. I'm sure that you guys, living in New York City, you see the same people that I see every day. That's an extremely powerful tool to reject certain work situations, to reject a faulty welfare program that's exploitative and sexist and racist welfare program. It gives you the options to really think about adjusting your life so that you have a job that you're not tired of or a job that you're not sick of. You can pool your resources in a community to uplift the community. Everyone can pool whatever their UBI is, maybe buy a building, do a startup, what have you. And so it really would give the individual citizen a chance to really think about how they can take some more control over their life. And I think that the obstacle in the government is that the people who who have the grip on power, whatever side they ally with or whatever, they don't really want a citizenry that can make those choices. And so they're gonna come up with these excuses like, oh, automation is still kind of far away, or, oh, your working makes you feel good, right? Well, yeah, working makes me feel great. Like, I feel great here. I'm kind of working right now. You guys are working. We're all working right now. It makes me feel great. But, having a soul-killing job doesn't make me feel great. And, so this narrative of, the powerful define what work is, and they want you to do the work that they say is work. They don't want to let go of that. So I'd say that that's that. I don't know, should I be responding also to about the cryptocurrency?
If you want.
Okay, I just want to say, I think it's amazingly interesting what you're doing, but I have to admit that there's something of a generation gap. I have to admit my utter ignorance with regard to cryptocurrency. I'm trying very hard to get my head around it. But what I can tell you from a person that doesn't have any understanding of cryptocurrency, I get the amazing power that it could shift power, and it has such a potential to shift power that I think it's amazing, and I definitely think that you guys are onto something. That said, I do think that government has a responsibility to do a proper UBI, but that doesn't mean that it's one or the other.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with what Michael said about the basic income experiments. They're not testing basic income, they're testing direct cash transfers. They're asking, if we give people money, are they going to be better off? And I don't know about you guys, but I don't even think that's a question worth asking. If you give people money, they're going to be better off. A basic income, the effects of basic income are macroeconomic. You can't test it, because in order to test it, you have to actually do it. You have to actually give money to everyone. So in order to figure out how basic income works or whether it will work, you actually have to understand the economic theory. And that's not something we're going to figure out by doing these trials. So I would say that one of the big obstacles for governments implementing a basic income is bad economic theory. They just don't understand it. And a lot of their models, a lot of the macroeconomic models that economists use, even academics and policymakers, they all assume that the way that people get their money is through the labor market, through jobs. So if you go to someone who's using one of these models and you say, how would a basic income fit into your model? They're just not going to have an answer, because it contradicts the basic assumptions of their macroeconomic models. I think as far as cryptocurrency goes, it's important to remember that there are certain things that are true about money that always have to be true. It needs to be a stable unit of purchasing power, a standard of value in which we can set prices. It's a standard upon which everyone coordinates. Everyone in the market coordinates and uses that standard. It's the common language of the market. And you're going to need institutions. You're going to need trustworthy institutions to be able to maintain that standard, et cetera, et cetera. Cryptocurrency isn't a magic bullet that somehow fixes the economy. There are still things we need to do. And like Diane said, we still need institutions to be able to implement this kind of stuff. And if we have these independent basic income projects that use cryptocurrency or whatever, mine doesn't use cryptocurrency, then kind of we're becoming institutions. So it's not like it's independent of the government. We're kind of like becoming governments or institutions on our own. So yeah, I guess that's it.
All right, I'm just going to throw out one last question, then we can open it up to the audience. You guys have been basic income activists for a long time. I was wondering if you had any comment about how the movement has changed since you first heard about it, first started working.
I think Michael should think that.
A number of ways. I mean, one way is that when I first started, when I went to meetings like this, I knew everyone there, pretty much. That's no longer true. I don't know most of it. So that is to say that it's gone beyond the few academics, mainly economists back then, and philosophers and activists that I would have meetings with every 2 years, like in late 1990s, early 2000s. It's gone way beyond that. Right? So it's much more, if not mainstream, it's close to that, whatever that means, right? So that's one change. Another change is the independent cryptocurrency stuff that I mentioned earlier. That's kind of new. It's quite new. That wasn't around back then. And also, I think the movement, if I can use that term, has become less academic. When I got started, it was a group of us who were activists and academics, but it was very much conference, like academic conference based and very academic in its approach. And that's in part because US Big, which I co-founded, I did with another academic friend of mine, Carl Whitehouse, and we were PhD students. We just finished back then, PhD recent graduates back then. And so we figured we would try to get the conversation started within the people we had most contact with back then. And so that's how it started, in the US at least. So it's much less academic. It's broader. I don't know everybody here anymore. And I think, it's more innovative, more creative. I mean, a lot of digital currency stuff. That's new and interesting. And we have a candidate for president. I mean, I shouldn't say we because it's not my candidate, but there is, and I'm like, come on, that's it. I'm not saying anything bad about it. I'm just saying it's not. He is a candidate for president, right? Running a basic income in 1999. That would have sounded kind of nutty. I mean, that's it's changed.
So I started going to US Big meetings in 2004. I think that's how we met Ari. And I'd say one of the things that I remember, there's sort of like these characters in my head that I remember who I haven't seen in a little bit of time. But I do remember, for example, the governor of Alaska used to come to US Big conferences, right? And the late Jay Hammond, and he was the person that implemented the Alaska Permanent Fund. And so, that's one thing that I remember. I remember that there were a lot of complaints at the time that that the demographic of the movement was overwhelmingly male. I don't know, it never bothered me. You're all pretty nice guys and everything, but pretty evolved. I thought, yeah. But it was true. It was slanted more male than female. I think that's changed. I'm really happy to see that there are a lot more women in the movement now, and it is definitely not entirely academics anymore. And to that note, we should plug the US Big Congress. So June
15th and 16th.
June 15th and 16th.
14th is the 14th event too.
Okay, 14, 15, 16 at Hunter College, Silberman School of Social Work is the US Basic Income Guarantee Network Congress. Say that fast. Anyway, and it should be great. And if all of you come, it will be even cooler because you guys are cool.
We are asking though that folks register through the website. It's free, but we want to get a sense of numbers.
Yeah, so go to the website, usbig.net.
Hey, so I'm the newcomer here. I've only been doing the basic income thing since 2011. But even since then, a lot has changed. As Michael mentioned, there's now a candidate running for president on a basic income platform. And it's just, I think everyone has kind of energized around that. I think, people who believe in basic income, they understand that the economy has the potential to do better for people. And then we see an opportunity for it to enter the public debate and the public consciousness. So Andrew Yang is going to be participating in the first Democratic presidential debates at the end of June, and it's going to come up there. And I think it's just a really exciting time right now for everyone who's involved with basic income. And even independent of Andrew Yang, it's been talked about a lot more over the past couple of years. So I'm pretty excited about that. Yeah, thanks.
All right, does anyone have any questions for our panelists? We'll just, I don't know. Maybe I'll go around with the mic again.
What if people come up and stand in line here? And
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, come join our stage. Oh, and everyone, please take note to make your question a question and not a statement.
Thank you. So I'm curious. I think Michael also mentioned a little bit about financing of the UBI. I haven't heard any question here tonight. So maybe your take on financing of the whole scheme, and especially regarding one problem with this whole thing, which is the landlord problem. That is, when you give $1,000 to each person, the landlords will be like, oh, now there's this disposable $1,000 in the economy per person. Let's just increase rents by exactly that amount. So your take on that?
Do I do serious questions first, or should I respond?
Just respond.
I don't know. We have 15 minutes allocated for the question and answer sections.
I'll take the landlord problem first and then financing. The landlord problem, I guess, is a subset of the inflation problem that people bring up. And as someone who's struggled with this for a while, that's always been to me the biggest potential problem with basic income I see. I haven't been worried much about people not working anymore, things like that, but it could be inflationary, and the mechanism could be, there's several, I guess, but what I'm thinking about is where, like you said, the landlord sees you make more money, do that, right? Or people do reduce labor supply, and to get them to come back to work, people pay them higher wages, and then they pass it on to us at higher prices. And so if I think of it that way, at least in theory, you could address the landlord problem and inflation more broadly if you index the value. I'm talking now government financing, right? Index the value of the basic income to increases in housing, maybe food. Because I imagine it'll be easier to raise prices in some areas, not areas, like in areas where elasticity there's inelastic demand, right? So you have to eat, you have to pay, right? And so if you index the UBI value to those prices, that maybe would address that. Landlords will respond, raise it again, and then you index it again, and you have this weird cycle. So maybe that can't be sustainable, but that's one way to try to respond to that. Financing, the financing I like best, I don't know how much revenue you get from that, but the financing actually I like best is where we sort of what Peter Barnes writes about, where sort of the Alaska model writ large, right? So think of different kinds of natural resources. People talk about the spectrum, the atmosphere, carbon taxes, but I like those because you are justifying basic income by saying that there are these resources that are commonly owned, and we deserve a cut from those things, and so tax those who privatize and cut from those, and then give us our cut, right? And that addresses a lot of the work ethic concerns, I think, as opposed, because better than relying on a personal income tax, which is really a wage tax in essence, given how people get most of their incomes, right? So I like it for that reason, but I don't know how much revenue you get from that. I don't know. People say a lot of UBI would do a lot of good things, but a lot of those good things depend on how big it is, right? So you need a revenue source to get big enough to do those good things, right?
Actually, being a little greedy here. Basic income solves the landlord problem. So basic income is an income that's not tied to any particular location. So what you're essentially doing when you have a basic income is you're flooding the market with a lot more livable places. So that's going to drive down rents. It's going to drive down real estate prices in general. If you're invested in real estate and you think a basic income is coming, you might want to get out. But I think that's a good thing. I think cheaper housing is better for people. As far as financing of basic income, just going back to what I was saying before, it doesn't matter where the money comes from. What matters is whether it has somewhere to go. So that means we can fund it entirely through deficit spending. The negative effects of deficit spending are, the negative effects of any government spending would be if it causes inflation. And if you're calibrating the amount of the basic income to the level of consumer spending that the economy can handle, you're fine. So the government can just spend the money into the economy. And behind the scenes, how that looks like with, issuing treasury securities and the Fed controlling the amount of treasury securities that are out there on the open market, like all of that is just details, but it all just works. If the government just starts paying out a basic income, of course, there's some legal and regulatory restrictions here. Politically, you have to kind of create revenue neutral policies and stuff like that. But from a pure economics perspective, you can just pay out the basic income, and there's no tax associated with the properly implemented basic income.
Are you a Keynesian?
I'm somewhat of a Keynesian. I think the biggest mistake that
It's not a bad thing, I'm just asking.
the biggest mistake that Keynes made was his assumption of the fundamental role of labor in the economy. So the problem he was trying to solve was involuntary unemployment during the Great Depression, when really the problem he should have solved was people having insufficient money to fully get the benefit of the economy. And he was constrained by some other things too. We were on the gold standard then, so it was harder to just print money and all of that. But I would say that's my biggest difference with Keynes.
Just keep in mind, we've got a limited time.
Yeah, come on and step into the camera.
For the next.
Do you know what is universal basic assets? My question is, where are these people? Because like asking government, we give government money, right? First, then we try to get it back, right? Like the general model. Somebody give government money, we try to give back the money. So UBA is about creating the asset that will provide basic needs, right? So where are these people? Where are these like active working groups, enterprises? Where are they?
So just the first thing, the way you characterize the government kind of taking money and then us kind of getting it back, I think that's kind of not how I think about public finance, but I won't get into that because I just talked about it. But as far as universal basic assets goes, the idea is that instead of giving people money, like through universal basic income, then you would give people some kind of asset that's expected to provide a return or something like that, provide a dividend or a payout or whatever. And the problem with universal basic assets is that if you give people an asset, they could potentially sell it for money, and if you're not allowing them to sell it, then they don't really own the asset. And what you're essentially doing is you're kind of taking this backwards way of providing them with universal basic income. On the other hand, if you're also asking them to manage assets, and most people don't want to think about managing assets and figuring out how to get the most profit and return out of them and stuff like that. So if you do let people sell them, then they're going to sell them. On the other hand, you can give people universal basic income, and then they can use that money to buy whatever assets they want. If they prefer to invest their money in that way, they can make those decisions. But a lot of people, they just need money and they don't want to think about it too much. So I think that universal basic income is much, much better than universal basic assets.
Where are those people?
Where are rich people?
Yeah, not the relation, not how you think about it. Where are these people? What they form, like where they are. Where the conferences, where
are the universal basic assets people?
Yeah.
They're online. I see them online. Yeah.
So just one thing to add to that is that in our current welfare program, there's a category called individual development accounts that was created way back and was the intended purpose of it was to create some kind of an asset system. But the problem with it, number one, the problem with it is that the people that created the system realized that to a certain degree it worked. With small, people would accrue small amounts of asset, but and to a certain degree that worked, and that is why it basically got defunded, because it started to work on a very small level for small nest eggs, not anything, we're not talking anything big. But it seemed promising, but the kibosh was put on it administratively, because it seemed to promote the freedom of the people who were using the system. That's my take on it. But talking about what Alex said, people need something that is immediate. If you're in poverty, you need immediate liquid capital. You're not looking to have an asset that you can't get to. An asset that you can't get to, you're still destitute, you still can't buy groceries, all of that.
Yeah, but UBI is here for, this idea is here for 20 years, there's no immediate UBI still, right? So there must be something else. You don't think?
I prefer the concept of the liquid income.
Thank you.
I think they may be one more question.
Hi. So I was just wondering, since we have you guys up here, I have a crypto tech background, and that's how I got into the idea of UBI. But my big question about government providing a UBI is, okay, so we get someone elected who wants to provide UBI, and then we elect somebody else, and they decide to stop giving us UBI. And now we've all quit our jobs, and what do you think? Is there permanence in creating structures around that could be protected if we never got a government UBI in the first place?
I would think that given what happened in Ontario, I think you would have to have some kind of a system to, you have to learn the lesson of that and try to find a way to, to enhance the commitment to it.
Yeah, so, Social Security, old age insurance was passed in the wake of the Depression. And before it actually was implemented, it was very, very controversial. And it's still kind of controversial today. There's a lot of people arguing about various aspects of it, but it's also something fundamental that's really politically impossible to take away. So my sense is that with basic income, once it's in place and people see what the world is like with the basic income, it's going to be politically very, very difficult to take it away. But to Diane's point, there was an experiment in Ontario where they were planning to give a lot of people money for a few years, and then they kind of canceled it partway through. I don't think a full-fledged basic income is going to be vulnerable in the same way, because it's really going to be something that everybody gets. There aren't going to be any voters who are against it once it's actually happening. In basic income, it gives everybody money, and it doesn't really take anything away from anyone. So yeah.
I just wanted to ask about this within the existing structure of the nation state that we do have. So in terms of competition, innovation, how different parts of the world are in different industries, but also in terms of global migration, labor flow, would some people be entitled to this while other people are partially disadvantaged by not being citizens? And crypto is interesting in this space as well.
So I'll give you my pie in the sky answer, right? I actually, I am for, I guess, what they call open borders, right? In principle, I would hope that this could be global, right? But the nation state is a constraint on that. And so that is what is appealing, at least in theory, about these independent currencies, right? I don't quite understand it yet, but it sounds like in theory, if you dealt with the bright ID problem, I can't put a t-shirt, but if you can deal with the bright ID problem, I think that could be a way, in theory, to do that. I don't know if they're going to be done through nation states. But I would hope that it would be global. But realistically, in the U.S., I would settle for one that went to citizens and legal residents. If you got that, that would be a good start in the U.S., right? In principle, global.
Yeah, what we don't want to do is create an underclass of people who aren't receiving the basic income and are just doing all the work for everyone else, that kind of thing. So I agree with everything Michael said for open borders and for a global basic income. In terms of implementing it at the nation state, I know Andrew Yang talks about it only going to citizens. I would at least want to give it to all residents, even illegal residents, because if you have, if you have people who are living in your country who are not receiving the basic income, that's worse for everyone. So I would want, instead of preventing illegal residents from having it, I would want to give it to them and maybe figure out something else about border control or something like that. But honestly, the United States can pay a basic income to everyone who comes here, and with open borders at the same time, it might affect the level of basic income that the economy can sustain, the level of consumer spending that the economy can sustain, but it's not an argument against basic income. So, yeah.
All right, I'm sorry, but we don't have any more time for questions for this panel, but thank you very much, guys. So we're actually going to begin our second panel now. So our second panel is going to focus on UBI cryptocurrencies and the governing bodies we live with. How do they fit together, or do they fit together? So let me welcome back to the front Ken Chester, the Diplomatic Outreach Director from MANA, also Ziv Keenan, Legal Lead at Good Dollar, Advisor at FinTech for Good, Philip Silva, UBI Advocate, Decentralization Enthusiast, and Director of the Red ID Open Source Project. Also, let me introduce Daryl Dwayne, Executive Director of CryptoUBI.org. Daryl's been in the Bitcoin space since 2010 and works on humanitarian causes and self-sovereign identity. So, let's begin. Many people who are drawn to cryptocurrencies tend to have an aversion to a government-run monetary system or even to central banks in general. So the question is, what are your thoughts on this? What's the relevance of distinguishing between an independent UBI system, a crypto UBI system, and a nation-state UBI system? Who wants to take that?
So yeah, Bitcoin was started in the wake of the financial disaster of 2008, and there's still plenty of people that want something different, and a lot of people are waiting for the government to create something around UBI, and that may happen. It's happening a little bit, but what would it be like for some advocates, techies, to create something on their own? That's what this is here for. And
Well, yeah, so my take on this is, well, one, they can coexist. I mean, even with Andrew Yang, he's our advisor at MANA, and one of many advisors, but he talks about, in his War on Normal People, he talks about essentially a digital token. He doesn't necessarily directly say cryptocurrency, but he advised us and he said, hey, maybe you guys could become that social token that I'm talking about in my book. He talked about essentially where people are helping their neighbors or performing other things that are currently not paid for in the current economy. This could be a method similar to time banking, if people are familiar with time banking. But he talked about that, and then he's obviously a candidate running on the premise of the government providing a basic income to all individuals. So I do feel they're compatible. Speaking from the MANA perspective, I do outreach to government cities here in the U.S. And outside the U.S., I go to embassies both here and down in D.C. and talk to national governments about potentially rolling out basic income to their communities, still being decentralized, but we would help verify individuals through people in their respective countries so that we can help every citizen of their country gain access to this basic income, or help them know how we can deploy it, or learn from them what's the best way to do outreach to their citizens. And that's how we ended up getting a deal to deploy to the third largest city in Ivory Coast, for example, by working with their government. Their government doesn't own the currency, nor does it have any control over it, but they are kind of helping us to get it out to the people on the ground in that particular city. And so I think they can coexist, they can work together, and what that looks like perhaps depends on the project and who people are working with in that particular space.
Yeah, I think what's attractive about crypto UBI is the fact that it's really scalable and fast technology. It's without borders, and another feature of the crypto UBI, which I personally really liked, is that unlike normal UBI, where you basically give money to people and hope they will use it for the best, with crypto UBI, you can control how that money is spent. So, for example, we had a person coming to us, and they are the largest provider of electricity stations in Rwanda. Those are off-grid stations, and the idea was that people could contribute money, and that would go to the solar electricity provider, and that they could redeem the good dollar for that electricity, and now you have a donor that knows exactly where his donation goes, and this like creates like a whole new ecosystem where people can now not only use those currencies to redeem it for electricity, but now they can use it between themselves as well. So I think this is another characteristic of crypto UBI. The problem is that with normal UBI, it just would take too long, okay? And we don't have the capacity right now, and we don't have the time to wait until normal UBI will eventually happen. And this is not the default solution. This is the solution we find because other solutions we don't see them working.
So what I want to say real quick is that what gets me so excited about the non-nation state UBI is that where all the money is in the rich countries isn't where it's most needed in terms of UBI. If we deploy the horizon that I'm aiming towards in my work, because I can't think beyond this now, is $1 a day to every person on earth. For the 3 billion people who live on less than $2.50 a day, it would be transformational. It doesn't do anything for Americans. $1 a day, it doesn't matter. But this is something that we could grasp. We could do that, and if we do, the amount of change that will cause will inspire people that, hey, we should do more of this.
Great, very good responses. All right, Ken and Zeev, you're both representing UBI cryptocurrencies. So my question for the two of you is, what do you think distinguishes each of your UBI systems from each other, and also from similar projects in the ecosystem?
Go first. I think one particular feature that we mentioned, or at least I should say I mentioned during the presentation, was the child savings program. That's something that we were really passionate about because we saw, well, stateside, of course, people come out of high school and they start mounting tons of college debt. But in the developing world, people, perhaps if they can even afford to go to school, they turn 18 and they just simply don't have the means to, either if they want to start a business, they don't have the means for that. They don't have the means to go on for higher education, and there may not even be any form of loan system in their country to begin with. They just can't. There is no way for them to go on and do what they have the talent to do, than what they should have the right to do in their particular country. And so that's something that we feel passionate about with the child savings program. And I think many of the others are doing a lot of good cross-border work. I think that's something, I don't know if that really sets us apart, but that's something we find quite cool about us. But child savings, I think, is a really big component of that, a big differentiator on our side.
Yes, so we're basically a research hub. I don't want to focus on any specific feature of our token, but the fact that we are investigating and we're doing all kinds of projects. We have a strong back behind us. it's a company that has a lot of financial knowledge and have a really strong personnel and resource to support this project. And I'm very happy that I'm taking part of it. And I think that the vision is what separates us. We want to be the provider of a global scale. The UBI is started by universal basic income, so we wanna target the universal side of things to create a solution which we can market and we can provide that will be available to everybody and would be truly universal and not local. And I think that's what separates us. Like, I'm really excited about what you're doing, and I think that what you're doing is great. And some of the things that you described, I heard before in the past, like the child saving. It makes a lot of sense, not only from a crypto UBI perspective, but any financial. It seems to me like a really good idea.
Thank you.
All right, so my next question is for Daryl and Phil. Both of you are working on broader ecosystem initiatives, such as identity and community. How do you see your work fitting in with the other projects in this ecosystem? And what goals or what principles do you think you share?
Thanks. So first off, being in the crypto space, I see a lot of reinventing the wheel, and I also see a fair amount of competition and a lot of sharing. And I think this particular idea of creating a crypto-based UBI, we should all be working and talking with one another.
Yes.
There's not a whole lot of reason to compete, and that these are going to complement one another. I look forward to seeing good dollar tradable with Mana and all the rest. So yeah, crypto UBI is evolving, but it's meant to be a clearinghouse of information and comparison of the different projects, and cultivating a list of best practices, cultivating a list of other ways that people can show up. And I also want to make sure that we don't just stick to formal universal basic income, but look at complementary currencies, look at other forms, the time banking, and all these other things that have been attempted along the way. And how can we make it easier for any of us to share easier and figure out what we really want? The bigger vision is, what is the world's mission statement, and how can we have enough fluidity in our flow of money, of value, to all just make it a great place for us and not suffer so much.
I really like coming to things like this and being with people like Eliza and Daryl, who just want, and all of you who want this general thing to happen. The specifics, I don't really care about, right? It's the basic idea. And for me, one of the ideas that I really focus on is it should be possible to share with humanity. And once it is possible, once we prove that if you want to give $100 to the world, you should be able to do that. And I actually think we're pretty close to being able to do that. And I think that once that mechanism exists that you can share, that people are going to start to share. And they're going to share more than you think they would, because they haven't been able to before. And I'm really excited to see what happens. So I want to do any part I can to enable that system. And whether the mechanism is Good Dollar or Mana or Ubu or Swift Demand or Gresham, great, whatever works.
All right, so each of you is advocating for not one, but two ideas, both basic income and cryptocurrencies. Neither of which is generally well understood by the public or well received. In fact, a friend of mine recently described crypto UBI as a Venn diagram intersection of things she didn't understand. So in light of this, what would you say to your skeptics?
That's easy.
All right.
Tonight, anyone that wants to receive their first bit of UBI, I will give it to you in cryptocurrency in a way that you can actually understand. And this is just the beginning. So yeah, we need to work on the UI, UX, user experience, user interface. But we can figure it out. So yeah, it's complicated, but we want to give free money to people. I think they'll figure out a way to get it.
I downloaded your app, and I still didn't get the dollar.
You gotta get from me.
Yeah, directly.
We are building a web interface so people do it themselves
Okay.
right now.
Okay.
It's
because
centralized.
This is something I just needed to clear with you. Yeah. So, first of all, skepticism is good, but it's not working. And I discussed it in the in the talk that I gave before. So it's much more. You can benefit more by being a believer than a skeptic. This is my my poor experience in this world, and I'm offering to everybody, open your mind. There's new technologies emerging. It's going to change the world. It's going to change the way that we operate, and try to understand them and let them operate, let them work. I'm a lawyer, so I see places where regulation just don't understand the technology and sometimes kills it. I see how things that could have been really terrific and wonderful just being stopped. And I think in this specific use case, also from legally speaking, there is a lot of opportunity that is not being tapped yet. To create something which is really different, which works, and which does not seriously violate any securities or WML laws. Yeah, so this is a very interesting specific case. So this is what I said to my skeptic. Yeah.
So one thing to add on to my friend at Bright ID who just talked about if you give people, if you promise people free money, they're going to find a way to get it. That's very true. I can tell an interesting story about that. Is we have Kaliku Kaba, who is our representative in Uganda. He was resettled originally in the U.S. as a refugee, and then we kind of brought him on board and sent him back to Uganda to work. Well, he's coming back, so don't worry. He's just there for a visit, and so we didn't send him there permanently. But he's there now on the ground. He's trying to explain to people in a village that only speaks Lugbarra, which is a local dialect that doesn't even have a word for internet. And yet the people are asking him, how do I get this basic income? And they're trying to learn about cryptocurrencies when there's no word for internet in their language. And yet they keep asking, can you explain this to us? And they want to learn because they heard, hey, there's money here. And our crops have been dying due to climate change, and subsistence agriculture isn't going to work. So we're going to find out, we're going to create new words. He called me the other day saying, hey, I don't know the word for cryptocurrency or even digital currency in this language, but I'm going to try my best because they sure have a lot of questions and they keep on asking. So people will find a way.
I would just encourage people to start thinking differently about what money is. There's such a scarcity mentality about it, and sure, money needs to have scarcity for it to work, but there still could be a lot more flow and a lot more of this lift that was talked about earlier. And to think about how people could spend time differently, and the lack of oppression that would be happening. So many people have jobs just for health insurance. Why do we need to have any of this? Why can't there just be more ways that people can move within the system and have mobility to create based on the grounding and the abundance that we already have all over this country and a lot of the world?
Okay, so just a general, how many questions are we gonna have in the audience? Maybe I should just cut myself off here and let you guys take over. Yeah?
Do you have more?
All right, please, go ahead, line up. First one on the stage. I guess, first, yeah.
Make sure you come on close to us so you're in the camera.
Sure. Maybe I don't want.
Okay, if you don't want, you can get on top there. Okay, that's true.
All right, cool. So, as a programming nerd, one thing that scares me about this is that as we create these new standards for UBI, that in the future we may see this like island effect, where essentially we have 3 different protocols that are providing UBI to the world, but yet they're not interconnected and they don't play nice to each other. And so, what I'm curious about is inside of the core development of these different UBI platforms, has there been cross communication between the teams to be able to try and establish some standards, so that way, as resources flow into the system, they can be disseminated through multiple different protocols that do the same thing.
So one of the things that we're actually doing at Mana is we don't want to be too proud about what we've created. We're so individually competent in our field here that we don't want to give up any control or anything like that. In fact, it's more the opposite. We believe we have something to offer, and we believe others have something to offer. So one of the things that we've been doing is we actively pursue merging with other entities in the crypto UBI space, because we think that may become a necessity and we can redouble our efforts. We actually all have unique aspects behind our respective UBI currencies, and sometimes it just makes sense to come together rather than have a competitive spirit behind what we're doing. So I think that's really at the core of who we are, and so it's not like, oh, we're stuck to this branding. We've already changed our branding before. We started as Grant Coin, and now we're Mana. We like the name Mana, but if something better comes along, or if someone else who we'd love to merge with has something cool, we can change again. I mean, it's not something we'll do every couple of weeks, but we want to do whatever is necessary to get us out in front of the most people with the least amount of difficulty and interoperability challenges out there in the market. And that's just something that's part of the culture. And I think it should be part of the culture in this particular field.
Yeah, I'll just quickly note that we've seen another fork happen. Swift Demand has forked over their website to team-based income.
No,
Nope,
scam,
not- oh,
scam,
sorry.
don't anybody do it.
Yes,
Someone
yes,
actually
yes.
is trying to scam a basic income thing.
Okay, yeah, thanks. It is, there's a problem there, I agree.
Yes.
Very, very much agreed, and there's some collaborations happening.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, yeah.
But that one is a scam, 100%
Yes,
scam.
thanks. Yep, thanks, Phil.
Phil, can you just say more about that, just so people are clear?
Yeah, and I don't even remember the name.
Team-based.
Team-based income, it looks just like the Swift Domain website, except it's a green instead of a red. They stole everything about the website, and if you enter your Swift Domain login, they'll steal your Swifts.
Oh.
So don't do that.
Oh, they're stealing.
They're stealing your Swifts.
Wow.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, no, just
Thanks.
total
Good.
dirtbag
Never-
scam.
Disregard my comment then. This is
Yeah.
not-
Sadly.
Glad we got that out there.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, scamming's a big problem in all sorts of things. I recently got my first Telegram impersonator who was asking people I've worked with to send money for this Venezuelan faucet that I was supposedly setting up. And unfortunately, one of my good friends actually sent him $50 in Bitcoin. And he was really depressed afterwards. And he's like, I don't want to really give up on this. And that was sad. Back to your question. I can't answer most of it. It's a really good question. Since Bright ID wants to work with all of them, at least that would have them coordinating on something. And coordinating on something should help to coordinate on more things.
And, sorry.
Just one more caveat. I just wanted to add that I'm not asking, or I'm not in favor of mass merging of entities. Like, it's strictly just open standards that can be coordinated between the multiple different, entities.
Please help us build something about it. Oh, sorry, yeah.
So we're totally open source. Everything that we do is open source. There's nothing, proprietary. Everything is up on the GitHub. So this is what we should all do.
Hi, so I'm curious, so the way that I kind of look at the cryptocurrency space, I see that the power of these currencies are the ability to kind of settle debts. So somebody says that it costs $5 to buy, let's say, a meal, and you can pay with some sort of currency, $5 in your pocket, or potentially they could take something else that can be denominated $5 and they give you the meal. So I'm kind of curious with the currencies that you were talking about, like Mana and Good Dollar, how do you convince merchants and people to actually accept this as a form of payment for goods? And how do you kind of build up the liquidity necessary to be able to do that?
First of all, this is the $1,000,000 question. I think that we all, ask ourselves all the time this exact question, and there are all sort of answers. Okay, so one answer, the simple answer, is that you could have, the coin backed by something, or you can have like a place where you can redeem the coin, then it will have some external value. The more complicated question, which most people do not understand, is just because. Okay? When Satoshi Nakamoto invented the Bitcoin, it wasn't worth anything. Okay? Only Satoshi had it, and it had no value, and then he transferred it to a second person. And then Satoshi, the second person, decided it had some value to it. And eventually down the line, they spent like a few thousand Bitcoin to buy a pizza. It was like the first pizza, it was what bought Bitcoin. And afterwards it developed, and right now we see that Bitcoin is a speculative asset that's being used and invested by institutional investors, big banks, all those guys, from Morgan. So we know that something that supposedly doesn't have any value back to it can have value over time. And this could be one of those paradigms that eventually would allow the market to operate, or just use this token as a means of barter transactions. So I know it's not like a very clear answer, but this is my view of things. Yeah.
Right, so as far as actually being able to use a crypto UBI for an exchange for some sort of good, someone actually did that without us even knowing at first. Someone set up Mana Basics and started accepting Mana in exchange for household goods and food. They started selling macaroni and soap and other toiletries and I think like popcorn. There's a random assortment.
I bought 16 packets of trail mix on there.
Oh yes, I got trail mix too. So you've used Mana Basics. Excellent. All right, so I'm not the only one here that bought trail mix. I got some mac and cheese too. It was best mac and cheese ever. No, but so someone who was a fan of ours set it up, and then we started like pushing it out there because we were so excited. Someone was willing to do that without us like telling them, please do this. And so we think it's something that will hopefully continue to come about naturally in the ecosystem as we go forward.
Yeah, I want to say something. There's a market operating in Israel. It's called Mamazon, and then those mamas, they trade those babies product that they have for hearts. So each one that registered to the market gets a number of hearts. And then start trading, baby products for hearts. They're gaining hearts, and then they buy their own baby products from other women. This is like very simple example. Like there's 100,000 women on this group. So this is like a very simple example how you can use something which is totally virtual, digital, that doesn't peg to anything. Yeah. And as a currency and as a means to do barter transaction, and actually, as you know, like this is how currency starts by doing those barters.
Hi, so my question is, I was listening very carefully because like I said, I don't understand cryptocurrency, but I want to understand, right? So, as somebody who, my overarching interest is eliminating poverty in the United States. So you had made a comment, Philip, about how $1 here won't do anything for anyone, but $1 a day in another country would be, life-changing and revolutionary. So my question is, as a person who wants to wipe out poverty here, how is a cryptocurrency, is there a scenario under which a cryptocurrency will be able to help the people that I'm concerned about, that don't have access to income here in the United States? And, because you also said when you were talking, you said that you feel like it has to be a cryptocurrency because governments have not been able to do a UBI yet. So we have this trench, right, or this breach that we need to fill, which is we need to solve it here, but you're saying that the cryptocurrency can't do it here. So where are we? And am I misunderstanding?
So the cryptocurrency part is not necessarily essential, right? You could, as Alex described, you could use a PayPal system. It doesn't need to be this decentralized thing. When I say doing the dollar, that's without massive funding. So if the government is willing to put up billions of dollars, we could do this as a cryptocurrency in this country, and I would certainly be supportive. If I had to vote right now, I would be voting for Mr. Yang. I think that could lead the world to seeing the change that UBI can cause for a country. Because I don't think the government is going to start giving hundreds of billions of dollars to do that. I think that sort of the community could raise enough money to pay for it at a small scale in other countries, and by watching that change, people would see what difference it could make and then start demanding of their governments, of their companies, that we do this. One concept I'd like to explain to people is the idea of encouraging a 1% for humanity pitch to businesses. Get businesses to donate 1% of their profits to humanity. And at the beginning, it's small, and those companies can put a logo on their packaging or on their doors so their customers know that's happening. But you could imagine if a company is sharing back to everyone, including you might be more likely to shop there. And then customer pressure could make that the norm until eventually it's the expectation that everyone does it. If all American companies gave back 1% of profits to all the American people, it would make a real difference.
That's a freedom dividend.
Hey, I'm in support. Anyone else want to get in there?
Quick comment on that. Right, so I mean, with regard to mana, we have we've talked about in the team about targeted giving, and so someone could target particular populations around the world in their own country or in some other place that they want to target giving to. But even beyond mana, the UBI movement in the crypto sector is powerful because I'm also advising people in the corporate sector. And so some people are wanting to reimagine, particularly tokenized companies are wanting to reimagine if they have any, heart, they want to reimagine social giving or their corporate social good programs. And so one of the things that I've advocated to places that I've been advising is if you want to do corporate giving, you want to give directly back to the community, you have a tokenized company, you have tokenized shares of this company. What if you set aside a certain percent of those shares and directly stuck it into a UBI basket for the community in which you live, so that people that are in these communities with businesses, let's say I'm from Michigan, so let's say you're in Detroit, and you could have UBI baskets of all the companies that have tokenized in Detroit. And so people there could have ownership of the companies that are around them, and they could benefit from that. And I'm talking to people in the real estate sector who are tokenizing real estate. You know what? What if you get an ownership and have a UBI basket of the building in which you live, or the buildings, even the commercial real estate in your surroundings? I mean, there's a variety of ways in which crypto UBI is going to transform the world we live in many ways. And so I'm really excited to see what develops in those directions. even if it's not exactly on the MANA project, but it's just in general how the movement evolves and will enable people to just simply benefit in a very direct way from the businesses or the buildings or anything in the local communities. I don't even have all the answers for that yet, but I think hopefully we'll start to see some of that come together in the near future.
Right, so I think I'm still remaining skeptical a little bit about the system. I'm a fan of UBI and crypto UBI, but the fact that if this system got more widespread, it could be gamed. There are big businesses who would just, set up fake identities. I think several of you mentioned like biometric identification to circumvent this problem. But then again, there's a problem that compared to identification nowadays that we use passwords or just pins. If that identification gets compromised, I just change my password. But when somebody steals my fingerprints and publishes them online, it's basically a public profile. So can we convince me to, that this will work?
Great question.
Yeah, sure. So I think it is one of the very most important questions because it's such a complicated thing to solve. We should do it communally, but with all of the great ideas that anyone has to work on the problem. So we should have some common sense just that we can communicate about what we're talking about and all agree that if each of us is opining on whether you are a unique human, well, no, seriously, right? If every single person in this room was running a node and trying to opine on whether you're unique, all of us would share some small data set that was sort of okay to share, and then all of us also have individual information to inform our own opinion. Some people maybe couldn't form an opinion, they don't know, and others know you deeply, and your mom is absolutely sure. So with a system like that, in Bright ID, we don't use biometrics at all. We think that that's a losing battle. Biometrics are usernames, not passwords.
Yeah, here you go.
What's your name?
Tomas.
Thomas. I think that the issue with biometrics, using biometrics to do this uniqueness test, is how is really when I connect these biometrics to Thomas. So if I'm just connecting the biometrics to one entity, okay, a unique entity, but I do not connect it to Thomas, okay? So I'm not compromising your uniqueness or your privacy details, because actually it doesn't mean anything without them being connected to your profile. So that's my opinion.
So yeah, let me just restate a little bit more of the problem here. Crypto UBI will not work without some form of Sybil-resistant, defensible. Well, I don't even want to go with the defensible. I don't like systems that retroactively do the Sybil prevention. Sure, thanks. Great. Okay. So Sybil attacks are simply double dipping or triple dipping or more. So if you've ever made a site email address to go claim some coupon someplace, you have performed a successful Sybil attack. Good job. I've never done it. So to keep the money system to have integrity and to not allow scarcity to run wild and to have the system gained in many different ways, before we have a real system that's going to work, we need to stop Sybil attacks from happening. Some systems are taking a retroactive approach where they go and look for duplicates. I'm looking forward to the day when we create web of trusts that, by the strength of what Bitcoin is not hackable, likewise, you cannot enter into a system and make a duplicate entity. You also need to be able to show that you're alive. None of this claiming your social security benefits for another 10 years after you've died, or your UBI for that matter either. So anyhow, this is an active field of research. There's Bright Ideas certainly is considering a lot of this stuff. There's this group, Rebooting of Web and Trust, that's doing these kind of things. Trying to figure out how do we create networks of people, webs of trust, and how do we create them with anonymity? Because if we have any kind of login, password, centralized database, that also is going to get hacked. And you know, even all the clearances that the government has and people's security levels has been hacked by China. So this is going to be some way that we don't know yet how it's going to look, but there'll be some ways in which there'll be some comparisons that are done. It's not going to be biometrics entire, and if it is, there's still going to be some human behind it, but we're all going to be able to help be a part of that chain of security to build that web of trust and be able to validate it. A lot of this is going to involve zero-knowledge proofs, ZK snarks and so forth. There's a really neat startup in Barcelona called IDEN3. I recommend you check it out. That's just starting to scratch the surface on this.
Thanks. Hi, I have two quick questions. I'll make them quick. The first is, one of the things that seems unique to me about cryptocurrency UBI is the fact that it doesn't seem to give rise to the whole argument around the work ethic and getting something for nothing, and you know, this kind of deep-seated idea, especially in the American psyche, that if you don't work for a wage, then you shouldn't get that money. Somehow that's not part of this conversation at all, and where I've heard it elsewhere, it hasn't been there as well. It's the whole UBI principle seems to be based on this idea of just if you belong, then you get it. And there's no kind of opposition to that. So I'd be curious, like, why you think that is, that if it's the US government offering a UBI, then immediately there's this opposition or, you know, reaction, and there isn't one in this space. So that's one. And then the second one, on one of the Mana-based slides, there was something about social media, and I thought you were going to go there, but I came across this idea recently, and it's tied to this, you know, and I'm also new to cryptocurrency. I'm very, very ignorant. So I'm stuck in this idea of like, where does the value come from? And, you know, like, where's value generated, right? That backs up the cryptocurrency. And I thought where you were going to go is the notion, especially UBI around commons and social media being kind of a natural resource in a sense. And so then pulling the value out of that we all kind of create together, and then that backs it up. And so I guess I'm wondering whether you think that this particular system can actually capture that value or not.
Start on this. All right, so thanks for addressing that. I think I had moved quickly in interest of speed. But yes, I mean, the vision for Mana-Base is to become, essentially it already partially is, but our team out at Stanford's actively working on making it more of a social network. And it's the right time for that. As you hear about people wanting to, you know, break up Facebook, and Facebook has too much power, and these big tech companies have too much power. And at the same time, if anyone's used Steeming before and has contributed to their ecosystem, essentially, when you have, you know, upvotes as you might have in like Reddit, you're getting, you know, some amount of currency there, and that's something that we really want to have take place on our platform. People are providing useful content, contributing to the ecosystem, and they're there, and they are, you know, essentially making this a place where people want to interact. I mean, we have so many talks from within our organization about what we're going to do with this going forward, and actually, thankfully, it's still an ongoing discussion right now about, you know, what do we. At first, it was like, oh, do we make people sign on in order to continually qualify for the UBI? And then we were talking about, oh, maybe we don't want to make them come on. Instead, we're going to incentivize them. It's this back and forth that I think has been helpful with us, and especially in having a large team and a large number of advisors. We had a real diversity of opinions going forward, and I think we don't treat those decisions lightly, and we want to go forward and create this social network that is built with humanity first as its cornerstone. And what that looks like, it's still taking place, and it's still it's still an incomplete picture. But I think we're going to see that going forward with time. I mean, in this coming year, and especially in years to come. I think perhaps by the end of this year, I think, almost certainly by the end of this year, we're just talking with our team out at Stanford, and they're wrapping up some of the initial work so they can have less of an alpha and more like a beta out there in the marketplace as far as the social side. People can receive the basic income now, but the social side, is somewhat lacking. But that's the dream going forward at least, and we'll keep you all updated on that. You just have to join up based on.
Just wanted to talk about the first part of your question around people being lazy or not working or any of this sort of stuff. UBI, whether it's governmental or otherwise, isn't going to necessarily let things, isn't going to change, isn't going to, shift the needs that we all have within the economy. Now, some prices may change, the cost of housing may go up or down, different kind of things, but people are still going to want stuff and still going to want to have luxury and work for that as they desire. What I kind of hope for is a streamlining of social benefits where there's plenty of people who don't work right now already, like that maybe would want to work, but they don't because they would lose their benefits or they hide it, and so because so that would happen. There's also a lot of jobs that get created just for having jobs that maybe don't really serve a purpose. And those jobs would then not be as relevant, wouldn't be there. We would just have universal basic income and people would have more freedom. And us as a kind of a group thing, be able to, or kind of our own field, would be able to decide where the energy wanted to go rather than the more hierarchical, patriarchal thing that we have now.
Never mind, I add one more quick thing. So I didn't address the first part of your question either. You were asking why this kind of thing isn't controversial on the crypto side, right?
Yeah.
And it goes back to like our name. With us, like manna, if anyone knows the old Bible story where the people of Israel were coming out of Egypt. So, God rains down manna from heaven. And so that's interesting. That's not a government. I mean, we're not claiming there's any divine entity behind what we're creating here, but it's not coming from a government. It's coming, from, as people see it, it's coming from nowhere. It's not coming from their tax dollars. That takes away a lot of the controversiality of it. Thanks.
Yeah, but exactly my point that when you're speaking about UBIs, you guys taking from a pool of money and then spreading it, and crypto UBI is just not that.
I'll just say that when I do explain this to people, I still get that reaction all the time. So sadly, it does exist. One difference here is that taxation may not be the right way to do it, but most people do think that that's the way that it has to happen, so that you have to take from somewhere and give to someone else. And unfortunately, redistribution is a bad word for many people. With a system like this, if you don't think it's good, if you don't want to participate, don't. If you don't like it, it's hard to see how you can hurt it.
Hi. I have like a question for Bright Idea. Is there any kind of penetration testing going on to see if someone can get $2 of the dollars? And if so, I don't work in crypto, so I don't know how easy it is to. I know you can, if you set up your smart contracts beforehand and patch them, you can, but if they're already deployed and you didn't, basically is the project easy to patch if a vulnerability is discovered in the community?
So we're just getting started. So right now, it's not based on smart contracts. Right now, it's manual. In the web interface, it's still not going to be smart contracts. So we don't have to worry that as the security as much. Right now, we know of attack vectors that work that can get multiple dollars. Up to this point, there has been no benefit to attacking the system. So this will be the first chance to see, and it's why we're sort of rolling out slowly and putting parameters until we make it strong.
Bug bounty. Built in your bug bounty.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello, I'm Thomas. My question is about privacy, and when you're gathering information to prevent civil attacks, how do you envision protecting people's identities from, say, being put on a list and then being targeted later by, say, a government entity or special interest groups that are very like, oh, look at these people who are in this group. Maybe we can go and just go for the throat here and just we're gonna go kill them all, put them in a camp, or something like this. So how do you envision, like, I guess the question is stated,
So, this is the hand waving part of it, right? Where you just wave your hand and I say 0 knowledge proofs. And so, to be determined, and it's a real problem. Very, very rare. Weird fact is that there were more per capita Jews killed in Holland than in Germany, because Holland had such a good national ID system that was able to be exploited by the Nazi regime. So let's not ever forget these things. There's a lot of questions now with the refugee crisis and how we provide ID to them in a self-sovereign way. So just look for anything, make sure it's self-sovereign when you're signing up for these things as they emerge. We don't want centralized databases, is my short answer.
Right, I mean, essentially agreed there. I mean, that's one of the amazing things about having a crypto UBI is if you had a government list and someone did come into your government, let's say you ran something in a state and there's a neighboring state that took over, right? You have concerns, with, let's say, Russia's action in Ukraine, for instance. Yeah, if this was a national role of people that are on a UBI and there is anything, yeah, they could come in and have access to the rolls of data. They came into a particular town and they get into XYZ server. If it's centralized, yeah, there could be a data trail if they, for whatever terrible reason, want to wipe out recipients of a local centralized UBI. Potentially that could happen, but hopefully, at least in our sector, we can do things better.
Bright ID, we're going to hold as little information as possible. The only information Bright ID network itself stores is the connection to the 2 public keys of the users. You can track it back and figure out the web from there. It's tricky, but we have no further data beyond that.
Also, for our project, we put a lot of emphasis on the concept of SSI, self-sovereign identity. And there's also other projects that out there that you want to look, maybe BankU, that using SSI, and I think that could be like a nice solution. And the other solution is, like I said before, just don't hold this information, or have a very separate databases which doesn't link your biometrics to your credentials.
Hi, thank you. Very interesting. I apologize in advance. I'm just very tired, but I still want to ask my question. With the question about the dollars, a question I've had is, you keep addressing the people who, of course, want to know, the people who have nothing. But my question is about the people who have a lot and who have a lot of incentive to say no. And what I was going to ask you, it's related to the same thing, which is, the argument that, well, Social Security has been hard to take from people. What hasn't been hard to take from people is Obamacare. And I recommend, just as a sort of, so people can steal themselves from these kinds of debates. The problem is, one reads the book Dying of Whiteness, which is analyzed responses to the expansion of Medicare in Tennessee and Kentucky. Tennessee, they've literally quantified how many people died per day as a consequence of not expanding versus Kentucky expanded and how many people lived. And still, the next governor came into Kentucky and won. Even though they had demonstrated how many lives they'd saved, the next governor came in and won by taking it away. And that is all a product of racialized language about accept taking that money, and also sort of ramped up ideas about whiteness and the privileges of whiteness and what loss of privilege would mean. And so my question is, you said, well, if people don't want to buy in, they don't have to. Will these systems all work if they're not universal? Because that's something which actually does fall down as far as Obamacare is concerned. It only works if it's universal, if it works at all. But can these systems work without having people at the top participate?
So using a totally non-governmental UBI makes it really hard for governments to break it. It's harder to get funding. I mean, governments are amazing potential sources of funding for this. If we do it outside of government, we don't really have to take their opinion into account very much.
I don't mean just governments, I mean church people.
Well, so if everyone here is getting manna and we all decide that it has value and are willing to trade our own goods and services for manna, right? A rich person not liking manna,
Sorry, I'm having trouble getting my head around it, so sorry for confusing.
it's really complicated and you're not stupid. Anyone else want to?
Another question?
No, it wasn't answered.
My question is whether you have to have your own token to distribute the UBI, or why can't you just use Bitcoin or another one that already exists? It seems like you have to first get people to use it and then get the value to go up or stay, you know. Okay.
How come the really smart questions come at the end? I think that it's a really good question that we were investigating. Like, should we have our own token? Should we use other native, not a native token or what? Some Bitcoin or Satoshi, whatever. I think that this is a question that we investigate. This, this question, there's the argument for and against using your own cryptocurrency. And the fact is, when you're using your own cryptocurrency, is that you just have the opportunity to create your own economy. And while you're using, third-party tokens, then there's already an economy, so you have to pay to participate in that economy. So it has its own costs. But as I said, this is something that we're examining.
I think that during the initial sort of proof of concept stage, the best thing is perhaps to distribute something that already has value. In the dollar for everyone, we're getting XDAI, which is a stable coin that a bunch of people already agree is worth $1. In the long run, I hope that we can create a brand new currency that at its foundation has equitable distribution as its model. So people can see provably that the only way anyone ever got it, sort of the only way it came into existence at its genesis was equitably. The Bitcoin, 100 guys own 50% of the Bitcoin. And while I think that's a better monetary system than most of what we've had previously in the world, 100 guys own half the money in the world.
But isn't Bitcoin more distributed than the rest of the altcoins?
I don't. None of the altcoins meet my definition of being equitably done. So we can do better.
I would just say that what you could do also is whatever coin is being distributed, get it onto an exchange, preferably a decentralized exchange, and just set it up so that every time you get your distribution, boom, it buys some Bitcoin for you, and then it's seamless. There's a simple technical solution for it. One way to think about it. And it seems to me there was a crypto UBI that was distributing Ethereum. I can't remember which one it was, but there was something that was going to actually use Ethereum directly for that.
And I guess to put it simply, right, we'd have to acquire Bitcoin from the beginning, and that's expensive. If we create something new, well, that's not quite as expensive. And as far as, like you said, if you prefer having Bitcoin, you could set up something where you're just going to if you have, Mana is on there's a couple of changes, and so you can go and trade that. And so there is a positive and negative, right? If you were just giving out Bitcoin, it would have, immediate value for people. Well, perhaps giving out the national currency that they're currently using would have immediate value. They could spend it anywhere in their national economy. But then there's the cost of actually acquiring that currency, and it brings you back to like, how do you get that? Are you taxing everyone? Are you taking % of transaction fees, right? And so I guess the negative of having your own currency is that it may take time to have the value of that currency rise to a level whereby it actually makes a difference for people in the marketplace. So yeah, there's definitely a positive and negative to that. And we have been talking to various exchanges and so on, and talking about, oh, what if you would just donate a certain small percentage of your transaction fees or something like that. And so if it was donation based and there was an option where people could donate a percent or an exchange decided to donate a percent of the transaction fees, there's various players that could get into the ecosystem and they could make something analogous to a UBI out of a more mainstream currency. But I think, again, for like a startup organization, that could be, right, it could be troublesome for them to acquire the means. Right, so a UBI exchange, anyone perhaps. Yeah.
One last one.
Going right off the back of what you had just said, if you're capturing value in some way, like let's say you have some dApps that say that, okay, we will take a service fee on our protocol usage and give it to this universal basic income system. When asked the question of why they would do that, you could potentially say that they would be minted some mana. Now, why would they want mana? This is like the question, sorry for the memo, but basically like, have you also thought about with this token that you have now created a market for, establishing like a protocol usage for it? I think that with like Maker, we've seen that that's an extremely lucrative model in order to establish a good market for a token that maintains a decent value because it has this governance usage. So yeah, like do you foresee maybe there being this nice hybrid between like capturing value through an asset and creating your own asset that has utility tied to it?
We've actually indeed been doing exactly what you've said there. We talked about, right, and they're acquiring some percent of mana themselves. And so we're actually looking into that actively as we speak. So we're hopefully heading in that direction.
All right. Thank you everyone for sticking it out. Thanks to our panelists and our speakers, and thanks also to Bushwick Generator for hosting us. Yeah, and let's eat up the rest of the food. And,
you know what we want done with the chairs?
What should we do with the chairs? Should we stack them up, or leave them decoratively discreet?
Stack them up.
Thanks, everyone.
Stack them up, these are classic.